Hello, welcome. Today we're going over Notes 5.1, which is Sampling and Study Methods. Unit 5 is in our Introduction to Statistics. So throughout this unit, we're going to be working with data. So today we're going to focus on different methods to obtain the data. So when you're working with the statistics, you're always going to hear, or the word bias is going to come up quite often. So in terms of statistics, what do we mean by bias? So it is a flaw in the sampling process that results in data which favors a part of the population. So a flaw in the sampling process results in data which favors a part of the population. That's what we talk about bias. Random. The goal is obviously to have unbiased survey or sample. This can only be accomplished with a random sample or survey. This is not easy to make happen. So, for example, let's say I needed to select 5 students. If I close my eyes and just randomly pointed at 5 people in the room, that's not random. Something in my subconscious is telling me to pick those people. So there's some type of bias. A truly random sample or survey takes away any judgment. So the old school way is put everyone's name in a hat and draw 5 names, right? Completely random. New way is using a computer and a random number generator to select the people. So every student in the room would be given a code that corresponds to the position on the roster. The first student would be assigned 1, and the last student would be assigned 34. Assuming there's 34 students. We would program the computer to select a certain number of people using a random number generator. So what is the population? Well, that would be all the students in class. Okay, so that's your population. It's all 34 students. The sample, right, would be the 5 students selected. And is there going to be any bias? There's not going to be any. Because I am giving everyone a number 1 through 34, I'm going to choose 5 random numbers, right? So we say we 5 random people, so there's no bias. So that's completely random. That's a random sample. That is what we're trying to shoot for every time, but it's not easy to obtain. Okay, another approach is a systematic approach. So this is a person who is selecting a sample survey, follows a defined pattern. It's a systematic sample. So here's an example. The president of an amusement park is curious whether customers think it's a good idea to spend millions of dollars on a new roller coaster. The first day of the operators of the new roller coaster, the line is a 2-hour wait. The survey the guests, they ask every 20th person. So it's systematic because they're asking every 20th person. Right? There's a systematic approach to it. So what's the population? So what's the big group, right? The larger group. Well, that's all the park guests. That's the population. The sample, right, is every 20th guest in line. Alright, so the population is every person in the park. The sample is I'm taking every 20th person in line. So is there any bias? So you're surveying the people in line. They're waiting in line. So they must think this roller coaster is worth waiting if they're going to wait in line. So yes, there's going to be biased. they're going to think it's a good idea because they're waiting in line. I mean, they are waiting in a 2-hour line. So if you don't think it's a good idea, why would you wait in a line for 2 hours to ride it if you don't think the roller coaster is a good idea? So there's going to be some bias. All right, convenience. As the title implies, the convenience method of sampling is where you come up with a quick and or easy way to get a sample. Right? What's the easiest way for me to get the data I need? Convenience. So, school principal wants to randomly survey students. Each counselor is given 20 surveys to hand out during lunch. One counselor decides to pick a classroom to one of the exit doors, hands a survey out to the students who come out of the classroom when the bell rings. Right? The counselor handed out all the surveys in 1 minute. So the population, right, that's all students in the school. The sample is the 20 students in the class. So is there any bias? Well, what type of class is it? Right? For example, at our school, maybe they're coming out of a health class, right? So they just took health and now they're coming out of that class, right? And they just learned about what soda does to your body. They probably wouldn't vote to have soda, right? Maybe it's a 7th grade class and they all want soda right now, right? Maybe it's a senior class. It just depends. So there will be some bias depending on what class it is, what students are in that class. So again, you're going to see throughout this set of notes that a lot of times there's going to be bias. It's really challenging to get rid of all bias. That's why you try to do a completely random sample, but that's not easy. It's very challenging, and it can be expensive. So next we have a self-selected survey. This is where the participant isn't actually selected. The participant volunteers. That's the key phrase, volunteers. Right? And the reason they're volunteering is because they're interested in the topic or they have become aware of the issue. It's something that's important to them, one way or the other. So you saw your congresswoman on the news last night talking about an upcoming bill. She said she wanted to hear from the people in her district. Since you know the bill and you oppose it, you call her local office and you write her an email regarding her opposition. So the population, right, would be all voters in her district. The sample would be anyone who contacts her. So is there any bias? Well, right, you watch the news, she's on there. The only way you are going to respond is if you care one way or the other. Like you either really like the bill or you really dislike the bill. Those are the only people that are going to respond. So only those who watch the news or those who really care. Those are the only people that are going to respond. Right? You really care about the bill, right? You watch the news and you care one way or the other. If you didn't watch the news, you wouldn't know about her wanting to contact you. Okay. So here's another example, right? School board meetings are open to the public. Meeting agendas must be published at least 1 week in advance. You happen to be at the school district website and you see a topic you are passionate about. You're going to see that it's voted upon, so you want to make sure you're available to go to the meeting. So the population would be everyone in the district. The sample is anyone who shows up. Is there bias? Well, ask yourself, how many of you have ever been to a school board meeting? Right? Not very many of us, right? So first off, to even go, right, you have to know when the school board meeting is happening. So there's some bias there, because that means we're looking for something, right? You had to even know when the meetings were. Second, you have to really care to go to the meeting and speak up. Either you really like what they're talking about or you really dislike what they're talking about. Right? So the bias would be only those who saw the agenda or only those who care. So there's going to be some bias. So stratified is when a type of survey or sample when the population is divided into subgroups and then random samples are taken. This ensures that all subgroups are represented in the selection process. So here's an example. There are 5 elementary schools in the Clovis North Educational Complex that feed into it. Clovis North administrators wish to survey 100 6th grade parents regarding the use of laptops. The administration wants to make sure the parents from each feeder school participate in the survey. So they divide the population into separate schools and randomly select 20 6th grade parents from each school. So they divide the population. There's 100 6th grade parents, what they're trying to get. So the population would be all 6th grade parents in the CN area. The sample is going to be the 100 6th grade parents. Is there bias? Probably really not much. I mean, it is random. You're choosing parents from each school, but again, you're only choosing 20 from each school. That's really not a lot. Right? So, I mean, there's potentially some bias, but not that much. Again, biggest argument is you're only taking 20 parents from each school, right? Think about how many 6th grade parents there are, right? That's not a large sample. All right. We also have studies. So those are some different samples we went through, right? So we went through random, systematic, convenience, self-selected survey, and stratified. But we also can do a study. So we have an observational study and an experimental study. So 2 different types of study. Both have something in common. They both involve research. So an observational study, the research is done by observing. So a researcher wants to try to determine the daily routine of chimpanzees. He goes into the habitat and watches them interact throughout the day. He records the results. An experimental study, the research is done on data that's generated from within the experiment itself. The experiment often will usually contain 2 groups, a control group and an experimental group. So a researcher wants to know whether or not the SAT review course is actually helpful. So she takes 50 students that received similar scores on the first attempt. All 50 students were going to take the SAT again. She had 25 of them take a review course, while the other 25 did not. The improvement of the two groups was analyzed and compared in the control experiment. The control group is a group which did not take the review course before taking the SAT. So example 1, does high octane gasoline help your car's performance? So they took 20 trucks, 10 of them were filled with high octane for 6 months and the other 10 were not. After 6 months, the performance is compared. So that's an experiment. They had two groups, right? An experiment means they're actually doing something. They put gas into the truck drove around, right? They recorded the results. Example 2, a researcher wants to find the differences in behavior in friend groups at high school. She watches the different interactions between students. That's an observation. There's no experiment. She's just watching. So, experimental study, something has to happen. They have to perform an experiment. Observation, they're just watching. So we have studies, we have samples, we have surveys. These are all different ways to collect data. So again, notes 5.1 is about sampling and study methods. Different way to collect the data. You got to have the data first before you can start to analyze it. So to finish up the notes, make sure you answer your essential question at the top by writing your summary here at the bottom, and then you'll be done. Have a great day.